with load growth and data centers. It's a great and unique opportunity for our nation to really transform our lives.
Exelon CEO recently said that Exelon is planning to sort of step up the push to own power plants.
We need more generation. We need more electrons. We need more power. Nuclear, renewables, storage, natural gas needs to be part of that.
How do you balance improving what's already there and building what's not there yet?
As we make these investments, it's done in a way that keeps services at a high level and makes sure that we don't shift costs from one customer base to another customer base.
Hey everyone, and welcome once again to Power Perspectives. I'm Kinsey Grant Baker. Here's a little thought experiment for you. Imagine running operations at one utility. Maybe you already do. Think of the to-do list, though, the countless elements of governance and operations, the big picture work on data center demand and grid mod and affordability. And now imagine doing all of that for 6 utilities. That's just another Tuesday for today's guest, Mike Innocenzo, Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at Exelon. Mike is responsible for governance and ops across Exelon's 6 utilities. He serves as chairman of the board of directors for each of those companies. He's also responsible for cyber and information security services, corporate physical security, IT, safety, supply training, and transmission strategy and compliance. So we're really grateful he's here today. Mike is obviously a very busy person, and we're really excited for this conversation. Mike, how are you? Welcome to Power Perspectives.
I'm doing really great. It's a great morning here, and I appreciate you guys having me on.
Absolutely. I appreciate you taking the time. You're somebody whom I'm sure many of the people in our audience are eager to hear, perspectives and ideas and your view for the future, your idea of where we go next. Obviously, a lot of the conversations we have on the show lately center around what comes next. It feels like a bit of a crossroads moment in a lot of, the lives and work lives of people listening to this show. So we have a big goal today. The goal is to get a better understanding of your perspective on that future we were talking about from where you sit at that intersection of, reliability, affordability, and grid modernization. And we're going to dig into how Exelon is thinking about a few key things. Number one, data center load growth and AI. Number two, workforce and customer equity. And number three, practical ways that utilities can modernize the grid without losing sight of those big things like affordability and resilience. Before we dig into those big questions, which big is certainly what they are, Mike, I would love to hear, just out of curiosity, what are the day-to-day differences between running, a single utility, which you did as the president and CEO of PICO, and governing operations across 6 distinct operating companies at Exelon? What's the difference there? What's been the biggest sort of shift in your day-to-day or your responsibilities?
Yeah, first of all, running a single utility as CEO. So I was a CEO of one of our utilities, Pico, for about 6 years. Prior to that, I was a chief operating officer for 6 years. In that case, you're really everything is your responsibility and accountability. So with having 6 utilities, we have an extremely talented leadership team with the CEOs at each of our utilities and the chief operating officers of each. So a lot of the day-to-day operation really sits with them, and they do an incredible job. I've got an incredibly talented team who works for us. And I would say the other difference that's with a company our size and scale, we really try to leverage our size and our scale to make consistent customer experiences, to make it mean something to be part of the Exelon family of companies, what we stand for in terms of safety, reliability, resiliency of the grid, how we treat our customers, how we show up in our communities. Those are all things that we try to drive consistency and excellence in each of those areas. But when you have 6 different utilities, you serve 6 different customer bases, and what is important to the customers in West Philadelphia may not be the same thing that's important to the customers in Maryland or in Southern Delaware. Running kind of the 6 companies, drive those things that are excellence and should be consistent across all of our companies, while recognizing the unique needs of the communities and making sure that we're showing up for our customers and our communities in the unique ways that they want us to show up. And sometimes there's little differences there. So making sure that we allow that to occur.
Yeah, totally. One of the biggest learnings that I have, experienced over the last couple of, weeks of hosting this show and working at Energy Central is utilities are not a monolith. There are a lot of nuances and specific differences in customer bases, and I appreciate hearing you bring that up at the beginning of this conversation. I imagine it's something we'll touch on quite a bit, especially when we get into more of the customer focused elements of this interview today. So I'm excited to dig in further with you, Mike. And I want to take this moment to shift our focus to a little bit of that big picture question that I mentioned at the top. The goal here today is to answer that one big thing. How is Exelon, the largest electric parent company in the US by revenue, the largest regulated electric utility in the US with approximately 10 million customers, and a company with about a $45 billion market cap, transforming the grid to secure solid footing in this demand spike that we have ahead? I think the best way of answering something that's that big is to break it into smaller parts. So I want to start with the data centers and AI hyperscaler demand element of this conversation that dominates a lot of the ideas, the predictions, the prognostications that we have in this industry. So to set the table a little bit, can you tell me more about what Exelon's current demand is for interconnection requests and load growth across your territories, across those customer bases? What are you dealing with today?
It's an exciting time to be in our industry because we're seeing demand and load growth beyond what we ever have in my 30 plus year career with Exelon, and it's largely been, I would say, within the last 18 to 24 months. If you look at the last 2 decades on the grid, we've really made investments in there to drive safety, reliability, and resilience at a time when the load growth was sort of flat or declining based on the backs of energy efficiency and record low energy prices. So we were really able to dramatically improve reliability and resiliency of the grid. And I start with that because that's the foundation. As we talk about this new opportunity with load growth and data centers, it's an incredible opportunity for all of the industry, not just Exelon. It's happening across our country. It's a great and unique opportunity for our nation. AI has the potential to really transform our lives. There's a real key strategy to make sure that we keep these data centers in the United States, keep them on shore. They provide security. They provide opportunities to improve our businesses, all of our businesses. They provide job growth and job opportunities. So it's something that we really need to make sure that we get right. We start with the foundation, though, of making sure that we never lose sight of our job is to ensure that the grid is operated safely, reliably, it's resilient, and that we're balancing that with affordability. So, I should start with that as sort of a background. In terms of the types of load we're seeing, we're really seeing levels like, as I mentioned before, levels that we've never seen. We have currently around 17 gigawatts that are sort of certain in our pipeline, and so what we mean by that is, that these are data center customers who have put down deposits, who've acquired land, who've ordered equipment, because a lot of what we're hearing throughout the whole industry is that how much of this load is real, how much of this will really show up, and that's important, right? Because we know load is going to increase, we know it's going to transform how we're going to have to operate the grid. We also know that there's a lot of and anytime there's something new, there's a lot that's going on. So not every data center may show up in the location that it's intended to show up, and our customers, our data center customers, are looking for, they want available power, um, and so they are really casting a wide net. They are looking for speed to connect because in this race, it's really about how quickly they can get online and how quickly they can operate, and they're looking for safe, reliable, and affordable power. So, getting back to the pipeline at Exelon, we're currently seeing about 17 gigawatts. A good portion of that, or most of that, is in our Northern Illinois company, Commonwealth Edison. Um, but then, and that's probably, of that 17 gigawatts, approximately about 15 to 16 are in Northern Illinois. And then we've got about 2 to 3 in the Mid Atlantic of that certain pipeline. We have another pipeline in addition to that 17 gigawatts that is customers that are currently going through what we call cluster studies. And that is when somebody attaches to the grid, these are all customers that are going on the transmission system versus the distribution system. It has a huge impact to the grid. And so we have to study to make sure that we know that we can connect them in a timely manner. We understand what the impacts are to the grid. So we analyze it at a peak day, at their peak load. We want to ensure that even with one or two pieces of equipment that could be out for other reasons, that we're still able to keep the lights on for all of our 10 million customers. So there's another 16 gigawatts that are in that stage if they're going through those studies. And to put those numbers in perspective, Commonwealth Edison is our largest of our six utility companies. The peak load for ComEd was actually set back in the year 2011. So it's almost 14 years old, and it was about 22 gigawatts. And we currently have about 16 gigawatts of that, 15 to 16 gigawatts of that pipeline in Commonwealth Edison. So from a peak load of 22 gigawatts to having another 16 in the pipeline and then another 12 or so being studied, you could see the impact that this could have on the grid.
And it's a big jump, I appreciate you framing this in a way that feels maybe a little more optimistic than some people I've spoken to. You said new, exciting, and incredible opportunity. All of these things are true. At the same time as this is a challenge, this is a big jump. This is going to take a good amount of investment. I think we can do better to recognize as an industry that those two things can be true at the same time. I'm curious about, what are the decisions or the strategies being implemented to ensure that that jump, in ComEd, like you mentioned specifically, what are you doing to ensure that that change, that kind of like jump up can happen, seamlessly, that it can happen and people can still have power in their homes just as they want power in the data centers as well. What has been the playbook that you guys have been running to prepare for that and to ensure that it happens, smoothly?
Yeah, it's a great question. You really have to start with square one when you start with talking to those customers, and just think about how the grid operates today. So we always plan for and design and build for the grid at its most stressed, right? So think about a 95-degree day in the summer, hot, humid, maybe not a lot of wind, so there's not a lot of wind generation on the grid. And then think about the stress that that puts on generation stations and power plants, the stress that puts on the transmission line. So maybe you have one or two lines out of service. You have a power plant that for some reason is not able to show up. So we really have to design for the worst case scenario in our planning design. But when you think about that 365 days a year, that probably occurs maybe 2, 3, 4 days a year, maybe a little few more than that. But what happens on the grid during those days? And then there's also what happens on the grid the rest of the 360 days. And I'm in Baltimore today, and it's an overcast day, a little raining. There's a lot of capacity available on the grid. So the first thing we start about it, and we know that on the grid there's certain areas and pockets where we have more capacity than others. So we start that process when a customer comes to talk to us, and they tell where are they interested in locating, how quickly, what flexibility do they have? Because for a lot of situations with these data centers, they've really got a lot of options available to them. It's really land and available power. So pointing them to the portions of the grid where we can connect them the quickest and have the kind of maybe the least impact to the overall performance of the grid. That starts with square one. We then go through studies and analyzing how it would operate under those peak conditions that I just referred to earlier, and then we'll identify what other um, enhancements, improvements we need to make to the grid, and an approximate timeline for that. But we always start from the position that says, we're going to connect these customers. We're going to connect them as quickly as we can. Connect them in a location where we have the opportunity. Where we're working with the customer, we have that flexibility that we can, reduce the impact, both kind of from a timing perspective, but also from a cost perspective, because we want to make sure that this is a good thing for all of our customers, not only in jobs and things like that, but ultimately, if we take this, the machine that we've built over 150 years of the electric grid and optimize it and make the most use out of it and balance out the load on the grid, this could be a benefit to all of our customers.
Totally, and it truth be told, sounds a little pricey. Can you tell me a little bit about what you're spending on this kind of improvement, to the grid? What's the cost of making all this happen?
Sure. I mean, well, and we spend a lot without the data centers, right? So
Right.
for Exelon, just between 2025 and 2028, we'll spend about $38 billion in making enhancements to the grid and modernizing the grid. And that falls into a lot of different categories around reliability and resilience. But the customers have seen incredible benefits in the last decade of improvements that we've made to the grid, kind of on a similar scale. We've been able to reduce outage frequency by 40%. All of our 6 utilities are in the top quartile for reliability performance in the United States. And we know that that's really important to our customers. Our customers depend on us every day to keep the lights on and keep the gas flowing. So making sure that as we make those investments, there is a direct benefit to each and every one of our customers.
Makes a lot of sense, and we'll get more into the customer element as well. But before we do that, I'm a little curious to hear, your perspective on balancing the old and the new. How is Exelon first identifying and leveraging existing grid capacity to then number 2 accelerate that build out of new infrastructure? How do you balance improving what's already there and building what's not there yet but needs to be or could be or should be?
We try to do a little of maybe call it sort of stacking benefits, right? So we've got an old grid that needs to be enhanced, built. We've got obsolescence. We've got some carriers, and this is both our transmission and our distribution. So we've got portions of our both transmission and our distribution system that are over 50 years old, and so that we need to just replace them, replace the elements of that: poles, wires, cables, substations, upgrades to just be reliable, bring them up to modern standards. They've served their purpose for 50 plus years. But when we do that, we try to build with an eye to the future. So, one example is as we do some of this work on these transmission lines, we're retiring older voltage levels and we're increasing the voltage and we're increasing the capacity. So the immediate benefit of that today is a new piece of equipment that better withstands weather, that is reliable, resilient, but you've also built the capacity that as we add new business customers on, or as customers want to use the grid differently, think on the distribution system for rooftop solar, electric charging vehicles. We've got a grid that's better able to support that and handle that. So benefits today for the customer in terms of keeping the lights on, benefits in the future as we move further down the road on this energy transition.
Yeah, it's really interesting to imagine building infrastructure now that 50 years from now can still be, modified to be used in the future. The the Jetsons told us we were going to have flying cars, and we don't quite have that, but like we've got massive data centers, and how do we predict what that's going to look like in 50 years is an interesting,
It
thought
is.
experiment, an interesting hypothetical. Now, when we talk about these large load customers, you mentioned there were three things that they're particularly interested in. They want available power, they want speed to connect, and they want safe, reliable, affordable connections and power. On that first one about available power, I would love to hear your perspective on generation specifically. A lot of the conversations we have around improving the grid to meet these hyperscalers and their large loads and those demands, it centers a lot more around the T and D than it does the generation. We've got power; it's just getting it where it needs to be. It's moving electrons where they need to be. But Exelon CEO Calvin Butler recently said that Exelon is planning to sort of step up the push to own power plants, own generation in your service area next year. Can you tell me a little bit more about this push and about the reasoning behind it? It is a pretty significant shift from what has been the norm for a long time in about half of the states in the US. So, what's behind this effort, and what do you expect to happen in 2026 as this kind of increases in terms of frequency and effort?
Thank you for asking that because it's an important one for us, and I'll also say it's an important shift in where even we were as a company. So many of your listeners know that we are a T and D only company, so we do not own or operate any generation. Exelon, prior to 3 years ago, was a combined company. We split off the generation side, and that is with a peer company of ours, now Constellation. They own and operate all the plants that used to be part of Exelon. They're an excellent company that operate in the competitive market, but we made the decision a couple of years ago that we were going to focus on regulated markets only and T and that we saw this massive demand. And if you look at what's impacting a lot of things on the grid, there's the investments that you and I just talked about for the past few minutes on the T and D portion of the grid, But with the loads that we're talking about, and I just gave you the load increases that we're seeing, or the potential load increases that we're seeing just for Exelon. And that's happening for I won't say all of our peer utilities. I think Exelon's ComEd is a top 5 data center location, so we're maybe seeing a little bit more of our fair share than other companies, but it's certainly happening all over the country. Adding to the infrastructure on the transmission grid, we need more generation. We need more electrons. We need more power. I think the markets have done an incredible job over the past 2 decades of making the most out of the resources that we have to be able to provide affordable power and safe and reliable power to all of our customers. But it's a very different time. I just mentioned, our that the ComEd's peak load. In fact, all 6 of our companies, their peak load was set back in the year 2011. So this is like for a decade plus or a decade and a half where we've seen flat or declining load growth. So the existing generation infrastructure has really been served it very, very well. But with the load increases that we're seeing, which could be 50%, 75%, or even if it's only a 30% increase, even if it's more moderate, it's going to require a lot more generation. We believe that you're going to need a lot of different tools. The tools that got us to this point need to change going forward if we're going to adequately meet that demand for generation. We're not seeing a lot of new generation build. We're seeing high customer prices. We are a part of the PJM interconnection, the PJM RTO. PJM has increased capacity prices in an attempt to signal that new build. And we've just not seen the market respond to those higher capacity prices. So our customers are paying higher prices for that increased generation, but not seeing the generation show up to show for that. And that's not to say that we don't think that a competitive market will work. We think the competitive market is important, and we think that needs to continue to be part of it. We just think there need to be additional tools to help get the amount of generation on as quickly as we need it. And we think regulated generation doesn't need to be the only tool, but we think it's a very effective tool, because when you provide regulated generation, and what it gives the states is really, we call them the 3 C's. It gives them certainty that if they agree to it, it's going to be built. It gives them customer benefits, because we think under a regulated model, a regulated utility can build it at a much lower cost of capital. And it gives them control. They can decide what type of resource they want to build. So when you think about the new generation, we're a company that believes we need all the above. Nuclear, you need renewables, we need storage. We think natural gas needs to be part of that. So if you're a state that says, "Hey, look, I need new generation, but I really want it to be focused on renewables, community-based solar, storage," a regulated model allows you to get that control of the type of resource that you want, certainty it's going to be built, and the customer benefit of knowing that it's going to be built at a lower cost of capital. And that's why we're advocating for that. It really, we're going to need to meet demand with more generation. We're a belief that it needs to be all of the above. We believe that the importance of our states, if our customers are going to pay a higher price, they should be certain that they're going to get something for it, not pay a higher price and hope the generation comes. And it also recognizes the unique needs of our states to be able to get the type of generation that's important to them that they want.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing all of that context, Mike. It certainly helps, paint a clearer picture of what that regulated power generation could look like in the future. I am wondering, just out of personal curiosity, what are the challenges to something like this? I think I read that it was like 13 states in some of them in the 13 PJM states are considering amendments to legislation, amendments to their state laws to allow regulated power generation. What would change their minds? What's the biggest challenge to making this happen if this is the push that Exelon is going for in 2026? Is there anything you're trying to strategically get in front of or get ahead of that might make that difficult?
But it's all difficult. But I would say, but back to the theme of, look, it's all very solvable. I'd start with its education. The electric markets are, if you're not somebody that's in it every day like we are, right, and you guys are, it's hard to understand for the general public. They just know that they get their bill every month, and it goes up or goes down, and I don't know why it goes up or goes down. So really education. Our customers, our legislators, our regulators, helping them to understand what's driving those costs, um, so that we can make sure that when as we we address it in the right manner.
Mhm.
So we really we started with just spending, but why have the bills gone up in the past 12 months, and really having them understand the supply market. This, it's a supply and demand issue, and capacity. What are capacity prices? How does the capacity market work? What is it designed to do? So you start with just that education. We need legislative enablement to be able to provide regulated generation. In our states, there are competitive states, on the competitive market. And again, we're not advocating uh, that the competitive market go to the wayside. We think it continues to be a very, very important and a very, very effective tool for certain things. But we think that with the speed, certainty, and cost of we need to build new generation, they need additional tools. So we'll need legislation to enable that. And then we're going to need a lot of customer engagement, because this will be different, and making sure that people understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. Sorry, we're an investor-owned utility, rather. So we also have to make sure that our investors are comfortable. They've invested in Exelon because of the model that we provide, which is low risk, highly diversified, T&D only company. So that if we were to move into this generation, we would need to make sure that we have legislation that makes sure that it's right for our customers, there's certainty of recovery, and that we're maintaining that low risk profile that has made us attractive to investors.
How does moving into regulated generation change your relationship with PJM? Does the relationship continue? What does it look like? What's different if this all comes to fruition?
It would still continue on. We think PJM is a very, very effective organization, very important organization. They do a lot of things very, very well. We just think that the current tools that they have are just not adequate to meet this new generation demand. So we think between enhancements in the PJM market, having other tools, which could include regulated generation, um, would allow for us to meet the demand. But our relationship with PJM, and the role that PJM plays, it will still be very, very important. We just think it needs to be altered and changed.
Yeah, totally. Okay. I wanna take this chance now to change, lanes a little bit and talk more specifically about customers and affordability. This is something that we have touched on several times because this is so integral to pretty much every decision I imagine that, leaders at utilities and leaders like yourselves are making. So how do you balance you mentioned, jobs and economic opportunity and having a market in your territory that has a lot of interest from large concentrated loads. How do you balance that opportunity, the economic development with, jobs and data centers and taxes and all of that with the customer impacts? Can you talk to me a little bit about what that experience is like to ensure that you get the best out of the good stuff and that you limit the fallout of the bad stuff?
Yeah, and I would say you and we start with the understanding that the only reason we are here is because of our customers and our communities, and never losing sight of the fact that our number one priority is to make sure that we show up for our customers and our communities in a way that they want us to show up. And that is never losing sight of safe, reliable, affordable power, a good community partner, and a company that they can be proud of having them in their community. And that's always really critical to us. And we start with that mantra, and it drives every decision we make. Um, and for those of that are really close to the industry, with some of these large loads, there was some debate, over the last 12 to 18 months on kind of should these facilities exist in front of the meter or behind the meter. Exelon was very we were standing a little bit alone at the start of this, and it was about our belief that any of these new facilities, any of these new large loads need to be in front of the meter. They need to be paying a full transmission rate because they need to be paying for their fair share of the grid and these upgrades, so that we weren't benefiting these customers at the expense of every residential customer who's working hard to pay their bill. So, at the time, it was a tough argument for people to understand, why was this our fight? Why were we? But but we were very clear about it. This was always about advocating for our customers and our customers' affordability. We serve Chicago, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., all great cities, but all cities that have a significant population of our customers that are low to moderate income, that work
Mhm.
hard every day just to pay their electric bill. We never lose sight of the importance of that. So it really drives every one of our decisions. So, making sure that as we make these investments, it's done in a way that keeps services at a high level, keeps affordability for our customers, and make sure that we don't shift costs from one customer base to another customer base. And that shows up in how we showed up in front of the meter, behind the meter. It shows up in how we work through the tariffs for these large loads that are coming on, and it shows up in how we're trying to address and why we're being so vocal in how we meet this resource adequacy, how new generation comes. Because ultimately, the best thing that we can do to moderate the costs for our customers is making sure that the supply meets the demand. And then I would just add that it also shows up in how we individually show up in the community. So making sure that we've got very robust customer assistance programs for our low to moderate customers. Last year, over the past couple of months, you may have seen that Exelon um, created a $50 million customer assistance fund, and that is not customer paid. That's paid for by Exelon and our shareholders, because we knew that we had to show up to help our customers as we work through this transition. And $50 million is a very large investment. We also know that it's not large enough to address all of the concerns, but we felt that it was important to have our customers have relief and show up as we work through some of these longer term opportunities on the grid. So it's making sure that we have equitable dispersion of costs on the grid and sharing of the use of the grid. It's making sure that we've got really robust customer assistance programs. It's making sure that we've got that we're showing up in how we benefit our customers. And you mentioned the other part is that I think that's really important is as we make these investments, customers have to get more out of it than just it keeps their lights on. We also know that we're an economic driver. So it's very important for us that as we make these investments, there's people that need to do this work. And so creating job opportunities for the communities we serve. We have over 80 workforce development initiatives throughout Exelon, throughout all of our 6 utilities. We're recruiting from the communities we serve. We're training uh, those people to have jobs in our industry. We're working with partners so that we know that we're a big influential company. So not only a job at Exelon, but some of our vendors who are partners. A job in our industry can be life and family changing. You can go from being in a family that worked hard to pay their bills every week and to pay their electric bills to someone who's raising a family, affording a family, sending all your kids to college because of a career in our industry. And we know that that's very important. I've certainly benefited from it, as have my colleagues at Exxon, and we want to make sure that the customers and communities we serve that. So it's really making sure that not only do customers get reliable power and affordable power, that the community is better because we're a part of it, because we're creating jobs, we're creating opportunities, we're supporting our nonprofit partners. We want to be a company that our communities say we're glad Exelon's here.
Yeah. I really appreciate you illustrating all of that in more detail. I think it is an increasingly important part of the conversation about what the future of the grid looks like is also the people who are using it, and the recognition that customer has a lot of different meanings. It's a word with many definitions. You also teed up a great segue. Thank you for the help here. You teed up this idea of the workforce itself, that I would love to get your perspective on. You mentioned that this working at Exelon, a vendor, a utility, has life altering capabilities, right? This can be a really fruitful area for people to pursue a career. At the same time, we're hearing a lot of conversations about this skills gap or this, divide in the utility workforce today, knowing that what was necessary 20, 30 years ago, even, 10 years ago, is different from what's necessary today to ensure that we have, the modern tech-enabled grid that we are all envisioning. So I'd love to just get your quick take on the workforce concerns in general in the utility space, broadly speaking, and then more specifically, what at Exelon you're thinking about or prioritizing to ensure that as the grid changes, as demand changes, that the workforce can adapt or the workforce can change in lockstep.
It is a big challenge, and what's very interesting about it, it's very different and unique about where how you view the problem sort of depends upon where you sit. I had the opportunity to participate in uh, a Climate Week session up in New York this week, and it was very interesting. We talked about workforce, but and on the panel that I was with were one or two companies throughout the United States, but also international companies, companies in other countries as they're working through the same challenge. And it was very, when I think about Exelon and the cities that we serve, attracting talent has not necessarily been our problem. Actually, it's we're an employer of choice. Individuals would really like to be part of the Exelon family of companies. So our challenge has really been about how do we make sure that as we hire, we're creating these opportunities, it's going directly to the community. So making sure that we're recruiting in the communities, but also make sure that we're setting them up for success, right? So, you may be if you're somebody who grew up in West Baltimore, you may not know what it means to be a BGE employee or a work in the utility industry. So providing training skills, partnering with community organizations that do some of this work so that we support their work as well, partnering with community colleges and high schools to provide that training. But in our case, people want to live and work in some of the cities that we operate. In some of the areas of the country, it's trying to attract people where we need talent to where people may or may not have as large of a pool to pull from. So I think we've got to do sort of an all the above strategy. I think it's really creating an awareness of that these jobs exist. When I grew up, I didn't have any idea of what the utility, other than I would flip the light switch on. I didn't know what it meant to work in the utility. So creating that awareness of these jobs, they exist, creating that excitement that it's an exciting place to live. Sometimes people don't always think about the utility company as the most exciting and technically innovative. There is more exciting technical innovation occurring in the energy industry than just about any industry that's out there. So if you want to be high tech, this is a place to be. If you want to be in infrastructure, this is a place to be. So creating that awareness, creating that training, creating partnerships. Um, you know, at Exelon, I'm very, very proud of where we've come to with our workforce development program. We had our trials and errors. Uh, I remember some of the earlier programs I mentioned in my career when I was the CEO, when I first took over as CEO and got excited about a lot of these programs that we wanted to do. And some of them sort of fell flat on their face. And so that ability to be able to learn from our mistakes, to enhance the programs going forward, to listen to our employees, to listen to community partners, um, to make sure that we're designing the programs in a way that really meet their needs, and to really make sure that there's a solid connection to the jobs. I think it's one of the biggest mistakes we make is we think it's all about training and education and just think that that's going to show. I think there needs to be a tighter linkage between the awareness, training and development, and having a clear path to a job after that.
Yeah. And the thing that really jumps off the page to me there is this idea of excitement, of drawing these, connections and ensuring that people have the access to training or upskilling or reskilling or whatever they might need. But at the same time, just being more excited about working in this industry, that has been, I think, one of the big things that I've really started to care about over the last couple of months is the more people I speak to, the more leaders I speak to, whether that's C-suite execs or startup founders or analysts or, information wonks, like all of these people are doing something they're passionate about. That is exciting. This is the future. None of this, look around your apartment, your home, your job, none of it exists, right? Without electricity, pretty
Right.
much for the most part. And so having the opportunity to solve these problems, to rise to the occasion is something that we feel very strongly about. I imagine it's something that will dominate a lot of the conversations we have in the future. It's an exciting time. It's a problem, but it's exciting. It's exciting to solve problems and meet challenges.
When you think about the public welfare of the communities that we live in, it's hard to imagine an industry that has a bigger impact than we do.
Mhm.
Hospitals can't operate without power. police and fire can't operate without power. Um, climate change is a real threat, and you can't solve that without the engagement of the energy. Just solving this energy transition is going to be very important to that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm excited that there are people probably listening to this episode right now who will be, instrumental in solving a lot of those problems. So,
And have
the last thing I
let's have them join our industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got one last question for you, Mike, before we get into our quick lightning round here. And I want to just get your quick perspective on, regulation is something that matters a ton in an industry like utilities, specifically for, regulated utilities, regulated power generation. We've used this word a lot, but I would love to hear just at the highest level from your perspective, what kind of regulatory changes, whether state level or federal level, would most help the portfolio of Exelon companies to, do what we've been talking about today, to build this grid for the future that keeps customer equity in mind, that, keeps affordability and the energy transition in mind as well. Are there any specific changes beyond what we mentioned earlier about, regulated generation at the state level? What else would be helpful? What else would tee you guys up for success?
Everything we talked about is going to require new infrastructure build, new and more infrastructure build. So I think kind of whether it's regulatory, legislative, local, jurisdictional, uh, we need we're not going to be able to meet this demand if we can't build things quicker and more efficiently. And so we need kind of a regulatory structure, permitting, all of those things that are associated with them. It takes right now. There's a lot of regulatory, legislative, permitting hurdles that you have to go through to build, and they're important. So they are important checks and balances to make sure that we're building the right infrastructure and we're being a good neighbor to the community. So they're very, very important. They just need to be done better, more efficiently, and more effective. So I think permitting reform, make it easier to build, make it quicker to make a decision, and then send the right signals that make it right, because it's also going to require investment, and we want to make sure that these are investments that we're able to raise the capital at a very effective rate to be able to support these investments. So I think permitting reform, make it quicker to make some decisions, quicker planning, allow us to make longer term decisions because you know um, the speed that we're going to have to do this is going to have to get better, and making sure that we've got the right recoveries that enable low cost of capital come in to support these investments.
All right. I love it. There you go. Everybody listening there's the solution to all of this, right? Um,
That was easy, right?
Yeah, it was easy. How come we didn't do this 5 years ago? So Mike, as we finish our conversation today, we are going to enter into the lightning round. So if you don't mind, we like to keep these quick, rapid fire. Give
Sure.
us your quick takes on a couple of questions. The first one that I would love to start with is about your job. You rose up the ranks. We mentioned at the top that you were the CEO of Pico. Now you're the COO of Exelon. Can you give anybody listening to this any career advice for somebody who might want to kind of mimic that rise up the ranks, that ascent to leadership? What would be your one tidbit of career advice they can't miss?
That the best career advice I ever got was from a manager that I had when I was early on, and I was sort of frustrated, wasn't sure where my career, and he told me, "Hey, whatever you do in your career," he said, "work on work that's very important. Do work that's very interesting to you, and work with people that you like to work with." And when I think about my career in the energy industry, I can't imagine something that's been more important and interesting than energy and the energy transition. And I've been really blessed to work with some wonderful people and colleagues at Exelon and in Philadelphia and all of the cities that we serve over the years. And I think if you do that, wherever you go in your career, you'll be happy with the career that you've landed on.
Yeah, I love it. I'll take it. The next question for you: what is a headline in the energy industry that isn't getting the attention it deserves? Are there any stories that you think we should be talking about more?
Ooh, that's a tough one. And look, I think this. I would say the resource adequacy one. I think we're getting there. I think, but transitioning from the high bills to understanding why the high bills and what the fix is, I think we need a little bit more coverage of that and influence of that. Um, and then I just think the positive impact that we as an industry can have and are having on the communities that we serve.
All right. My last question for you here, Mike, is there an innovator, a thinker, a leader, an influencer in the utility or energy industries that you recommend people follow, check out, listen to?
I'll start with my boss. I think Calvin Butler is one of the really most innovative CEOs in the industry. Really thoughtful in terms of leading with a focus on the customer and the communities. I think Calvin's is a wonderful leader. So if you haven't followed him, please look him up and please spend some time hearing him speak. Um, and then I would just say there's some really great leaders that are working through this whole energy transition. So it's one that's really encourage everybody to get engaged.
Absolutely. Okay, Mike, we made it through the lightning round. We covered a ton of ground in this conversation. I am so grateful for all of the time, for you really digging deep and sharing so many specifics with the audience about how Exelon, how you and your team are approaching the coming decade and beyond. I learned so much, and I'm just really, really grateful that you took the time to join us today on Power Perspectives.
Likewise, really appreciate what you guys do. It's important, and really appreciate you shining the light on something that's so important. And it's such a great opportunity for all of us. So thank you.